Hello, Hujambo, Moroi, Sawubona, Salam Alaikum. I am Dr. Blamiers and I am excited to introduce Realize Africa to you. Wherever it is that you are and however it is that you say hello, if you were born in Africa, if you can trace your lineage back to Africa, if you have a nostalgic love for Africa, then a hope for our people, then Realize Africa was created just for you. Our founding group and partners are spread across Africa. I'm talking Lagos, Nigeria, Accra, Ghana, Gambia, Kigali, Rwanda, Tanzania, South Africa, and Zimbabwe, among so many other countries, and even the diaspora. Although we had not known each other initially or spoken the same mother tongue or gone to the same schools, we all had this irresistible urge to connect and start conversating around our African future, the present condition of Africa, and how the youth of Africa deserve the fulfillment of the promise of a better Africa from Africans. Our values of inclusivity and diversity allow every one of us to come together to contribute towards the greatness of our home, our continent, and our people. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are so honored to have great minds in the space, Professor P.L.O Lumumba, Princess Mukelile Zwelithini, and Ousman Touray, and they will be moderated by our very own Vice President of Realize Africa, Tatenda Makibicheche. We are so excited to introduce her. She has a passion for policy. She's currently studying her MBA and will be done early next year and will be consulting with American firms. And so just so enterprising and just really, really excited about Africa and changing Africa. Tatenda, over to you. We are so excited.
Thank you so much. I am so delighted to have this opportunity, and we are excited that you could all join us today for this wonderful day that we get to introduce Realize Africa to you and engage in a really engaging conversation with some premier panelists. And so as we go ahead and do that, I'm going to introduce our panelists, starting off with Professor P.L.O Lumumba, and you know, he needs no introduction. Many of you have gotten to see his work on YouTube or in different platforms, and he really has been revolutionizing and changing the way young Africans think about their own identity. So, you know, starting off, Patrick Lumumba is a leading Kenyan professor and lawyer who has served as director of Kenyan Anti-Corruption Commission for really long. He served in that position for a number of years. He is a lawyer and really a renowned professor who has done a lot of work to really change the landscape of Africa, and particularly addressing some of the solutions to some of our toughest problems that we face. So we are delighted to get to have Professor Lumumba on this panel to just get to share with us his thoughts and engage with us. And then secondly, we have Her Royal Highness, Princess Mukelile Zulu. She hails from South Africa and really represents the Great Zulu Kingdom, and embodies a lot of what it means to be passionate about culture and really passionate about the continent, and thinking much more broadly, particularly about how we elevate the girl child and elevate women across Africa. And lastly, we've got Ousman Touray. I have had an amazing time getting to listen to a lot of Ousman Touray's work on YouTube and across different platforms. Ousman rose to prominence from just one particular clip as he was talking in an interview about his passion for Africa and what he believes for the youth. And so and today we will get to engage with this amazing panel and just get to hear a lot more about the things that they're envisioning. And today our main theme here is towards a sustainable Africa. So how do we move from where we are today? We're amid COVID, things are really tough. And how do we move from here to an Africa that we want to see and envision seeing for the future? So just to get our panelists up, we will start with Professor Lumumba. I would love to start with the question for you, and start with a question as well for Princess Mukelile. You know, Africa, I think one of the biggest issues that we've heard or seen is around the education in Africa, and particularly education when it pertains to our history. I think, Professor Lumumba, you have you know, a name that harkens back to some of the greatest of our time. If we think into our colonial and into post-colonial eras, and how the great minds that have shaped and moved us forward. And Princess Mukelile hails from the Zulu Empire, and it's really a symbol of our strength as Africans, and something that we can hold pride in, to still have you know, a kingdom that kind of goes on till today. So my question to you, Professor, I know you are a devout Pan-Africanist, and you know, have talked a lot about Africa, but how do we define our African identity? Is there such a thing as one African identity? And if so, what does that look like? What does it mean to be African?
You know, let me start by congratulating you for putting this debate together. The question that you are posing is one that has been posed before. In the very early days of the struggle to regain independence, there were two major schools of thought. There are those who took the view that in order to be enough to be considered an African, you had to have a dark-hued skin. And there are those who thought that it was the state of the mind. If you read the early writings of people like Kwame Nkrumah, people like Leopold Sedar Senghor, Frantz Fanon, and many others who have grappled with this issue, those were the early debates. But today, when we talk about Africa and who is an African, it is very easy to find oneself in a pigeonhole which does not say who we are, because Africa is very diverse. Africa is diverse, with nearly over 3,000 languages spoken and diverse cultures. And that is the mosaic that makes Africa unique. But there is an Africa that existed prior to the entry of the colonizers and the enslavers. Before the Arabs came, the Africans interacted in their own unique way. Then the colonizers came, and they arbitrarily divided Africa into different spheres of influence. So that today, when you look at your typical African state, you have those with an umbilical cord with the United Kingdom, with the French, who wanted to assimilate Africans to believe that they were Frenchmen and French women, with the Portuguese, with the Spanish. Of course, the Germans did have their early stint until they were removed after the war. And then, of course, the Arabs. So there's been a process of changing African identity. There have been a process of Arabization and Islamization. There has been a process of Christianization. There's been a process of changing the African identity. And that is why today, having regained our independence, we are acutely aware that that identity that we were given by the colonizers must be removed, and we must regain our identity, which is unique, which is the realization that as Blacks, fundamentally, there are certain things that are unique to us. Our spirituality is unique to us. Our thought processes are unique to us. But there is nothing not to say that we are homogeneous. The Zulu have certain beauty in the things that they do. The Ndebele have certain unique things that they do. The Akan people, the Luos, the Dogon, the Wolof. And in a nutshell, therefore, we are saying that the unifying identity now is that we all belong to the mother continent of Africa. Some describe us as Black, but we are of dark pigmentation. And I think that that linkage and the realization that before the advent of the European and the Arabs, we moved freely The Khoisan were moving, the Zulu were moving, the Toposa were moving, the Luos were moving. And this is what characterized us. So that identity, our spirituality, our uniqueness in terms of our pigmentation, our thought processes, and post-independence, our realization that we are one people who belong to a single tapestry is what now defines who we are as Africans. Long answer to a short question because it does not lend itself to a short answer.
That is right. Thank you so much for that. And one other thing I would like to push a little bit more on you, Professor, and also bring in Princess Mukelile at this point. We recognize that, you know, as particularly when we think of Pan-Africanism and talk about Pan-Africanism, most people will particularly look at that as just Black nationalism. We've seen it, and it is what is, it is the core and the essence of how we think about ourselves and how we can promote and elevate ourselves. But in an Africa that we have today, where there is a diversity of peoples, a diversity of peoples who have different cultures, different religions, that is, of course, a root of a lot of the mixture that happened coming out from slavery till today that we have in post-colonial Africa. But how do we start to create this unity and inclusivity and a pro-African, or particularly an African identity where myself as a young Black female woman can feel proud in my identity and my color, but at the same time, also other people who may be of mixed races and other people that have joined us onto the African continent. How do we move together and move forward to build a unified Africa that recognizes this mixture that has happened over time? So just to give you a few minutes to address that particular point, Professor, and really define to us how we can view for ourselves, both in our own identity and as well in general, where we are today. And I have Princess Mukelile come in as well after that to talk a little bit more about tradition and how we uphold that moving forward in a fastly globalizing world.
If we agree that the mind is the standard of the man or the woman, then being an African must also be a state of one's mind. There may be individuals who have dark skins, such as we have, but in their upbringing and in their attitude, they are not Africans. So while fundamentally we must agree that one of the primary qualifications of being an African is simply being Black, and I'm using the word Black because nobody is really Black, but I'm using it as a term of art. It is then to be appreciated that Blackness is a primary attribute, but is not the only one. There are people who are of Caucasian origin, there are people who are of mixed race, who by their word and deed and by the manner in which they have conducted themselves are Africans and are therefore to be accepted as such, because in the things that they do, they have recognized that there is something that defines them, that gives them an identity, that creates an umbilical cord between them and the African continent and the aspirations of the African continent. So in my definition of who an African is, I will not be restricted to skin color. I would much more be persuaded that beyond the skin color, we must look at the mental composition and mental constitution of persons who identify with the continent, her people, her culture in its diversity, and her aspirations. And this is why great minds in the early days, such as Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Emery Lumumba, Modibo Keita, Julius Kambarage Nyerere, Ahmed Ben Bella, Gamal Abdel Nasser, although they were of Arab extraction and some of African extraction, they were quite clear that the state of the mind defines who an African is as one of the categories and not simply being Black. I know, for example, that there are people, particularly in the former French colonies and former British colonies, and to a lesser extent, the British colonies, who think they are British, who think they are English, who think they are French, who think they are Portuguese. And that is why I think it is Frantz Fanon who wrote the book, Black Skins, White Masks, or White Masks, Black Skins, whichever. But the most important thing is that we must realize, and René Descartes was quite clear in this, the mind is the standard of the man. The mind, I don't know whether it was René Descartes, but it was repeated severally by even people like Martin Luther King Jr., that the mind is the standard of the person. So if you look at it that broadly, then you are not in a problem. The whites who identify with us are as African can be.
Thank you, Professor. And I'm going to pull in Princess Mukelile as we're talking a little bit more about our roots and our identity here. I think Professor Lumumba perfectly put it there on just who we are and where we've come from and what are the different origins that we cannot deny and need to be able to recognize in order to move forward and really begin to uphold our own identity and move forward with pride. And so just you look absolutely beautiful today, I should say, and it gives me pride just looking at the beauty of you as an African princess. And I want you to point out a little bit more to you how you've viewed your own African identity, what that means to you. And I know you are in your capacity as a princess, move around, having young women and a number of people really uphold their identity and have them have the comfort in that particular identity. So I'd love for you just to talk for a few minutes about your own views and perception to some of the things that Professor Lumumba addressed today.
Thank you very much, Satine, and thank you very much for the compliment. Good afternoon, everybody on this side of South Africa, and good morning to you that side. You know, there's so many beautiful things about Africa, and I think that it is by no mistake that even today we've come together because we intend to have the right frame of mind in all the things that we do. And we need to be the people that stand up for Africa, more than anything, but in line with who I am and where I come from. And that is telling for the fact that, you know, girls and women and people around the world are very similar because we have our individual cultures that we need to embrace, that are the foundation of who we are and what contribute to where we're going. And I think that what is also more imperative is that it's interwoven in our DNA as Africans, that we are brave, we are conquerors through the things that we've experienced. But I think also just laying the foundation in terms of understanding that wisdom and education are two things that we need to embrace because they come in different packages. We look at elders in the community. Those people are very, very wise, and there's so much to learn from them. And no matter how highly educated you may be in the Western sense of education, there is who we are and the things that we learn that are the very things that will propel us to new heights as Africans. And also in terms of what it is that we need to instill in terms of the little girls that are growing up everywhere in Africa, because girls are very similar. Their challenges are all very similar. It doesn't matter where you are. I mean, they're girls that are conscious, that need the support, that need to be told or need to be reminded who they are based on where they come from. And yes, we may come from Africa, but there's so many similarities in terms of what it is that we can contribute to just being a voice that is a support, that is encouragement, that also speaks to embracing who we are. And the fact that if anything, more than anything, it's not by mistake that we are part of these experiences that need to occur in order for Africa to move forward. You know, no matter what it is that you do, who you are should not be altered by the environment that you're in, because you need to make a contribution and ask yourself, what is it that I can contribute to keeping and preserving culture, tradition, and anything that can make Africa what it truly is supposed to be?
Thank you, Princess Mukelile, for that. And Professor Lumumba, I think, given what Princess Mukelile has talked about, and though one of the things that you often speak about is also regarding the role of women in our society, in our culture. And I would love to point to you for a second here. I know you'll have to leave in a few minutes, but as we wrap up in our conversation with you, and as I start to move on to Ousman and talking to Princess Mukelile about the future of Africa, I'd love to hear your insights a little bit more around the role of women, the role of leadership in Africa, and how we move forward, given some of the things that we recognize our identity, we recognize we are, but there's been a bit of a leadership deficit. There's been some people that we've left behind on our own continent. Some of those are women, and in many cases, the youth themselves don't have as much of a platform to be able to engage and be a part of the change for Africa in a substantial manner. So in your opinion, how do we, as we chart together a vision and as we start to think together about where we move forward, recognizing our preconditions, elevating our culture, all these things, holding these things dear, how do we move forward, and what is the leadership that we need in order to move towards that in an inclusive manner that leaves no man behind in this walk towards a better tomorrow?
I think there is unanimity that it is one of the most stupid things, and I'm being very blunt, to leave over 50% of your population out of policy positions. Everybody recognizes that. But if you go a little back in history, in very many traditions, and Princess Mukelile, who is in an institution that has retained some of these traditional practices, will tell you that women are very powerful in African communities. Women's roles are defined, women are powerful. This disparity that you now see is partly a relic of colonization. It is the colonizers that came and redefined what roles women were playing. We now have the boardroom, we now have the political arena, which has been dominated by men and which has been made very violent and therefore unsuitable for women who are gentler. And this is why some of us take the view that the time has come that we must assess our specific circumstances and ask ourselves, how can we possibly, in the context of the current dispensation, ensure that everybody is carried along? And I'm very happy that in many societies now, having embraced these new practices, we are now recognizing that women specifically must be carried along. If you go to countries such as Rwanda, for example, now, there is a deliberate effort on the part of the government to ensure that women are playing critical roles at all levels, not tokenism, at all levels, real roles. And you'll see that in the manner in which they are conducting their affairs. In fact, in certain areas, women are now dominant. If you go to Liberia during the presidency of President Johnson Sirleaf, there were those very deliberate efforts. And I see that happening in Tanzania, in Uganda, I think even in South Africa. There are things that are happening which are affirmative action, recognizing the fact that there were certain recent historical handicaps which did not allow women to express themselves in a fuller way. So I'm under no illusion. And I keep on saying, I've only 2 daughters and I don't intend to have any more children. So yeah, I'm doing it for two reasons. One is altruistic, one is very selfish. And I want my daughters to live in an environment where they are judged by the content of their character. And if you look at many African societies where women have been given their pride of place to express themselves so that there is a symbiotic relationship between men and women, the product is amazing. But if you exclude women and you think as men that you have arrogated to yourself the monopoly of wisdom and knowledge, and you think you know what women want, then you lose it out. So I'm quite clear that women are and ought to be at the very heart of activities of the nation, and where they have been historically disadvantaged, deliberate effort must be made to bring them up to speed. I want to see more women in the boardrooms. in private sector. I want to see more women in critical position makings. I want to see more women cabinet ministers. And look at South Africa in critical areas. You have great ladies, the minister, your Minister for Foreign Affairs. I mean, I need not mention them, you know. And they are powerful. You go to countries such as Eswatini, traditionally, who determines who becomes the king? I mean, the Queen Mother is as powerful as power can be. Go to the Akan people in West Africa. So without belaboring the issue, there are two sectors of our societies that I think ought to be given greater prominence. Women, because womanhood is a permanent state, so you can't alter it. Youth keeps on changing, but during the period that they are in their youth, we've got to exploit their energy and make sure that they are mainstreamed as they transition into adulthood. So women, to me, game changers.
Princess Muke, you can go ahead and comment on that.
Thank you so much, Satenda. I think to Prof, it's such an honor. And, you know, honestly, I really am humbled to be in the presence of yourself, because, you know, it's such a privilege, and it's so exciting to just have people that are obviously at the level of our fathers and our brothers and our uncles and husbands and cousins that actually speak and actually advocate for us and root for women and young girls, because, you know, the landscape truly is full of endless possibilities of obviously what it is that we want to see. And I think that, you know, yes, history speaks for itself in terms of women have always played a very pivotal role, very crucial role in contributing to making Africa as a continent, even the rest of the world, as successful as it is. And I think that every one of us are connected to someone that we look up to, that are role models, people that inspire us, that really make us want to be game changers and contribute effectively in amazing and unbelievable and undeniable ways to making Africa better. And that is exactly what it is that we need. We appreciate the support more than anything. And, you know, just always talking about it, having those uncomfortable conversations with our male counterparts at times, and also even just among women, because the reality is sometimes it gets very tense in certain platforms where women don't want to actually allow other women in and other little girls to have the opportunities that they actually should have bestowed upon them. And, you know, this is very exciting. I think that this is absolutely incredible. The fact that we have fathers and brothers that see that are rooting for us here in Africa. I mean, that's heartwarming. Yeah, it becomes very emotional, very, very beautiful. Prof, thank you so much. It really means so much more. And even just to the youth watching, it all starts with the conversation. You know, it needs to be about Africa. It needs to be about women. It needs to be about investing in the future and those little girls that need that support, that need words of encouragement in such difficult times, because it's not easy. Not everybody has someone that they can talk to. And, you know, even culturally, in as much as we see the things and the way that they are right now, even culturally, there are still some barriers that don't allow for intergenerational communication that is successful. So we still need to break down that mold, but it all starts, you know, slowly we'll get there.
Thank you both for that. And, you know, as a young African woman, I fully recognize that is the beauty of what we have, and our mothers. I was raised by a strong mother, and I remember my grandmother in the rural areas. She worked tirelessly to raise, you know, over 9 kids, and really just working to move that forward. So I think as Professor Lumumba has spoken, and Princess Muke as well, I really appreciate you setting the tone there and really kind of looking at the fundamentals of what we need to be looking at. One, understanding our culture, understanding our identity, and then moving on from there, recognizing who we're leaving behind in this walk towards a better Africa and the future. And some of the things that we've talked about are things that, you know, in most cases are are things that people take as given and as granted. So I want to move us into more towards how we actually actualize this, hearing a little bit more of the examples of how you've actualized this, and bringing in Ousman and now into the conversation, to start to bring in the conversation around the youth themselves. So I know Professor Lumumba is going to have to drop off in any minute. So we really appreciate his time and talking through to us about some of those preconditions that we have to think through. But Ousman Touray is an amazing young Gambian who has really taken a lot of us on the continent by storm, because what I find particularly inspirational about you, Ousman, is that you have been bold enough to forge a way and forge networks for yourselves and show that on the African continent, even without necessarily leaving the continent. I myself am in the diaspora, and many others of young Africans, there's been a large brain drain, have moved to the diaspora, but you have found ways on the continent to show that there is a lot of room and agency. So there's young Africans who are watching at the moment, and I'd love for you just to start to dive in a little bit more and talk about what you have found as what are the things you're proud about in your African identity, and what are the things that you hope other youths can be proud about when we speak about African identity?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and I'm so glad to be here with my mentor, Prof, and Princess. Thank you so much for honoring the invitation equally. And I'm so glad to be with you here in this platform. So thank you so much for that wonderful question. Basically, education is something that is very core. And I think Prof made mention of how important it is for us to focus on the mind and how we can liberate ourselves from the very beginning. Understand, having that consciousness in our thinking, and then how we can come up together through platforms and then to provide maybe solution to the pertaining African problems. So basically, as a young student, I try to read books that are relevant to my field of study, which is development. And I knew on some literatures that most of the African problem today is as a result of relying on issues that doesn't work, in which we borrow Eurocentric models, in which, be it in the public policy, be it in the development models that we adopt, be it the Bretton Woods institutions and the loan that we take from them, and even in our education system. For that, when colonialism even ended, and most of our governments in Africa didn't take time to look into the curriculum and what they can actually teach the African child. So basically, through that line, I also have guardians, like people that I look up to. I remember I was watching the likes of P.L.O Lumumba when I was in junior school. I was reading books, that are related to Pan-Africanism and etc. because I read history equally. So those are some of the guardians. And I just want to say to all Africans out there, Africa is not an island. I'm not saying that every individual has to stay in the continent. But what I'm trying to say is that even if we are moving outside of the continent to go on site for something new, to go and look for new ideas, let us be accompanied with that sense of patriotism, with that believing that Africa has a people, Africa has a history, Africa has a civilization that we can represent wherever we are. And if we can focus on that, then therefore we'll be able to design something particular for the African continent, and all of us are going to benefit for the future.
Thank you so much, Ousman. And I think Princess Mukelile, as I bring you back in here, I think when it comes to the education, Ousman has talked about education, and we've talked a little bit about curriculum. And I want to push us to think a little bit more. If we were to design our own curriculums much more robustly, if each of you had the opportunity to educate the young African mind and dictate what are the things that we get to learn, what are some of those things that you think are absolutely essential in order for young Africans to grow up with a much deeper sense of pride, a much deeper sense of self-awareness about the beauties of the continent and what they have to offer. What are some of those things that we should be thinking about? I think Ousman, you already talked about some thinkers that you would put on your list, but what are the things that we should be learning?
Tatenda, thank you so much for the wonderful opportunity yet again. You know, it's really interesting that you would ask something like that, because I've thought of having an African Academy for girls. I don't know if that will happen, but I hope it will. Just having in mind, obviously, I think it's important to teach people or to remind people who they are if they've forgotten. I think that's a good start. And you know, I'll speak from where I studied and when I was at school. You know, the curriculum, well, I don't think was designed particularly for African people, because it had a lot of external influences. And I thought to myself, you know what, if I could design something that speaks to the African child, it needs to be something that speaks to who we truly are in terms of where we come from, identifying with that and the uniqueness of that, and then also just dreaming big and equipping and capacitating individuals in terms of what is it that is in line with who they are, that can contribute to what it is that they want to see as a desired outcome for us as a continent, but also contribute to the people of Africa within Africa, but also have your own individual aspirations. So yes, there would be sport, there would be culture, there would be tradition. I'd be even exploring different foods from different people and different countries, obviously even within Africa. I think also just designing or coming up with a framework that will assist to paint Africa for what it is that we want to see that is relevant, because Africa, I believe, as a continent, is very wealthy. There's a lot that's been stolen from us that I think we need to get back. But I think with the right frame of mind, I think a shift in mindset and actually being very clear about going for what it is that we want, I think that will inform what that curriculum would look like, which would be harnessing in terms of who we are, what it is that we want to see, and not allow for external influences, but to learn what we can, accumulate the information from people that are not necessarily from Africa, because information truly is a high and important commodity that we need to invest in, but to bring it back and use it effectively to bring Africa and make it what it should be. Yeah.
And Ousman, for you and what you've gotten to learn through your degree and some of the things that you're hoping to learn more and continue to explore, what are some of those the things that you would put in a curriculum for young Africans that you think are essential for them to be able to learn and start to understand about their African identity? I think you're on mute.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I think the beginning of all this is starting with the mind. What do we really teach the African child when we are in school? Let's start with the primary school. What history do we teach them? Because, you know, the fundamental thing is that we need skills, we need knowledge, but then we need those skills to be accompanied with that sense of patriotism, that the African child believes in the progress of this continent, that our teaching and learning are oriented and, you know, influenced by the vision of the continent, so that when even we are going to further our education outside of the continent, we are not trapped or tapped in those various countries, but we still have the zeal to come back and serve our own people. So the beginning of all this will be to focus on the history part, to teach the African child that Africa has a civilization, that Africa has a history. For instance, Prof made mention of the importance and the roles that were played by women. But today, not many Africans know that in the history of this continent, women play a pivotal role in terms of administration. In my own country, for instance, in the Gambia, we have the Wolof that are present in the Gambia and equally in the Senegambia. And you can even see, like they used to have like the Linger, the Awo. These individuals were women who play active role in politics, and they even administer certain regions within particular kingdoms. So today, we do not learn about this. And we do not get to understand that Africa has a civilization in its history, and that we can focus on to realize our own development within the continent without having to rely on another set of individuals. So this is something that we really need to look into. And an example of such will be Japan, for instance. We have seen how Japan was after the Second World War, but some of the things that they do is they were able to promote that sense of patriotism. But at the same time, their children were sent out of the country to go and learn, but then they keep track of it. Today, the African continent, most of the educated people here are present in the Western world. We have very few likes of Prof who want to stay in this continent and serve the purpose and serve the interests of this continent. Many individuals are trapped either in the US, in China, and in Europe. So how do we make sure that we promote skills, we promote knowledge in the youth of this continent, but then provide that better ground for them where they can realize their potentials, where they can realize their talent. And we can do this by starting with the education system, trying to teach the right knowledge to the African child through history, through civilization, promoting that self-patriotism in them. And then we create that better market for every individual.
And yeah, to what you are describing there, I think we find at this point in time that, as you mentioned, majority of a substantial portion of our educated youth are outside of Africa. And I want to move more to understanding a little bit more, talking about our economies and thinking a little bit more about the minute details about what we could be doing to move forward in advancing our economies. I know for one particular factor is our unemployment rate across Africa. I know for South Africa, for Zimbabwe, some of these rates are substantially high. Many of the youth who do stay on the continent cannot find opportunities, viable opportunities to work. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more, Princess Mukelile and Ousman, about what are some of the ways that we could be, what are some of the skills that we could be capacitating our youth with in order for them not just to be job seekers. We do need for more jobs to be created. And how do we move forward, or what are some of the things that we can be looking forward to in order for us to have the right job creation infrastructure, for us to be able to advance our economies, create more regional integration, and create more opportunities for people to be able to work and find opportunities across the continent.
Tatenda, thank you very much for that opportunity yet again. I think more than anything, it shouldn't even be about finding a job as such. I think what we also need to try and promote, like in Africa, is entrepreneurship, because, you know, youth have great minds. The youth are very imaginative, and, you know, the possibilities are endless. I think it's also about opening the right doors and also just allowing people to know and allow them access to information. I think that's also another thing that happens to be an issue. I think that even geographically located, sometimes it is a bit of a challenge, even with the influence of technology or the lack of it, that can also contribute very negatively to what the opportunities should be for the youth. And I think another thing is, you know, obviously I'm no expert, I'm not a minister in my country, but you know, I do have and do engage and look beyond the palace walls. And that is the fact that when I go out into the communities, you know, we need to stop wanting to give. And I think more than anything, what we need to do is we need to try and start capacitating and also lift each other up. Because the thing is, I think what also needs to change, and I have seen it before, and I sometimes see it still even now, that others of us that may have gotten better opportunities in terms of education or maybe even social status or whatever it may be, there are a number of external contributing factors that may contribute to that, but they leave people behind. Because the thing is, I believe that as an African child, if you've got an opportunity and you know the people that you live among, the circumstances may be different. So what you go out and learn, wherever you learn it from, bring it back home. And I think that that is the mindset that we need to have. And another thing is, you know, we have land. I can speak for us here in South Africa, and particularly in the Zulu Kingdom. There is land, but, you know, I don't know how to say this without making it seem terrible, but I'm going to have to say it because, you know what, we need to be true to ourselves because we're trying to find lasting solutions here. And the fact is, you know, some people are lazy. You know, you give them options, and yet even if they don't qualify, even from an educational perspective, but they want to be treated or they want to earn money that is as of a manager that has spent time at the desk, you know, that has invested in their education. And, you know, yes, you see the material things that they may want, but they're not willing to put in the work. And, you know, that needs to change, I think. And I think another aspect where I thought, you know, also having worked on a number of projects in the community with various partners and stakeholders, is that we need to make, I think, agriculture more attractive, more sexy, more exciting, because you don't have to be a farmer, but because of what it is that you've gotten an education in, you can integrate that. So I think it's about looking at the various ways that you can thrive in a particular environment. So I think it's also about looking around. I think agriculture, and I want to focus more than anything on that, because I think food security is another issue that we haven't touched on, that I think would be great to touch on this platform, because it's a problem. You know, people are hungry, people are starving. It's terrible. It's heartbreaking. It's sad. So I think more than anything, I think capacitation with a set of skills. I think people actually going out there and saying, you know what, I want to make a change, and be conscious of wanting to do that, and do that with pride, and know that there's a lot to learn. It may not be easy. We're not saying that it will be. And, you know, you can sit with your degree, but open yourself up to saying, you know, what else can I do? Connect with people. Don't wallow in self-pity because you're thinking that your job is going to come to you. It's not. Go to it. Go and find the opportunities. Use all that you have to make a brighter future for yourself, so that you have something to contribute, because we all have a legacy to contribute as Africans.
Ousman, I think Mrs. Princess Mukelile there has said a lot of things, and I'd love to hear what you think. You know, she mentioned she's making a statement out there that maybe some Africans aren't looking at and seeking out for some of the opportunities they need to. Maybe we're too dependent on some particular industries over others. I want to hear your thoughts. And one, young Africans, you studied development, and then I know you've probably thought through a number of different aspects of this, but as we think about opportunities in a fastly digitalizing world where some of the jobs that are most attractive are probably tech, but we want to make sure there's a lot more young people that get into those spaces. But how do we get ourselves to be thinking about the different opportunities, and how do we get people to do some of the things I've seen you do well, which is connecting with other people, making you were able to gain some of this platform because you were bold enough to walk up to someone and get to engage with them on a conversation. So let's talk a little bit more. I want to hear your thoughts about what Princess Mukelile was talking about, and feel free to push back on anything if so, but I want to hear your thoughts a little bit more about the job market and the skills and opportunities for young Africans in a practical sense.
Yes, thank you so much for that brilliant question. Looking at the job market, there are predictions that in the near future, 47% of jobs are going out because of artificial intelligence, because of the advancement of technology. And what is the African preparation towards a situation like this? That is why I always say this, that Africa needs to be prepared enough and prepare this generation for situations that are to come, because there is that coming change that is fundamental and inevitable. So we must be set for it. And see, made mention of something very, very important. We need to look into how we can diversify the African economy in agriculture. But even when we went to our farms and produce, where do we go next? You found out that in Africa, farmers are the poorest. And farmers are the individual that feeds the world. How can the people that feeds the world become starving, living in hunger, being the most, like the poorest people in the continent? That is unfair. And these are as a result of structures which are set against the progress of the African continent. It is not something that our leaders are not aware of. This is deliberate negligence. If we go back a bit in history, the Bretton Woods institutions were formed back in 1945. The World Bank, later on the IMF, and etc. The IMF introduced the Structural Adjustment Plan in Africa and many other developing countries at the time. Now, the Structural Development Plan, Adjustment Plan, for instance, is one of those policies that impoverish all African states, the Gambia in particular, because they were put in traps, in loans, in which they do not look into. They were only looking at the paper money. And therefore, you come to realize that public expenditures were reduced, employment started to fail, and Africa never got the chance to correct this particular mistake. And even after the Structural Adjustment Plan, African countries continue to rely on the Western world for policies in which they tell us, like, Africa become that experiment ground where theories and policies that has no facts in it as to whether they will work or not, Africa becomes its first phase of implementation. We keep trying and failing. So if we want to move as a continent, there are things that we need to consider. First, going back to what Marcus Garvey said in his days, that any leadership that teaches you to rely on another race for survival, it will enslave you. And if we want to go away from this, what do? We have to rely on ourselves. Self-upliftment, self-reliance. How do we make sure that we promote agriculture in a way that it reflects in the people of the continent? How do we make sure that we promote public policies that are not targeting next elections, but next generations? How do we make sure that we adopt development plans and strategies that is there to equip the African youths, to equip the African people in a way that it is going to register development and success for these generations and generations to come? Today, Africa sits on resources that fits the world, but then how much is the African continent benefiting from this? Let us talk about our resources. Who sits on the resources and who benefits from them? Today, most of the African countries that has resources centered in them are where you can find the poorest people in this continent. So that is as a result of what? Individuals who come to the continent with an objective. And that is to say, how do we make sure that we use these resources to go and develop our own countries? But at the same time, how do we make sure that this be a continuous process? Today, we don't have the Westerners, the white individuals, the Arabs present in Africa like they were doing during colonialism. No, they program a group of individuals among us, as described in economic development by Todaro and Smith as the comparado groups. This group of individuals are Africans. You see them as Africans. They lead us in our institutions, but they don't represent Africa because they don't represent the African interest. Yeah. So we have to consider all these things to make sure that we diversify the African economy, starting with the indigenous industries. If you look at the Senegambia region, for instance, we used to have the leather industry before colonialism, in fact. Shoes were made by Gambians. All the equipments and tools that we use were made by Gambians. Today, those industries are nowhere. They're in fact nowhere to be seen for a simple fact that we have involved or put ourselves in traps that we don't understand. And another bigger trap is globalization itself. Africa as a continent finds it difficult to integrate among ourselves. We have the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, which is to champion regional integration, to foster more market integration, give more opportunities to the African youths, and look up to for the Agenda 2063, the Africa that we want. Now, considering all these factors, we come to realize that its implementations is always a challenge. And now, if you look into the African continent on a general view, you come to realize that we are trapped with markets in which we tend to trade more with Westerners than trading with the African continent. Today, it is easy for me to even travel to a Western country than to travel to another African country. It is even easier for me to trade with individuals in the West, in Europe, in America, than to trade with people in East Africa and etc. So we have these border restrictions. We have this limited market among the African continent, making it very difficult for us to promote that regional integration that is going to capacitize the African youths, give them a better platform, give them better markets to excel and realize their potentials. And at the same time, having jobs that pays. Today, many people are leaving the African continent. It is not because they don't have jobs. It is not because they don't have skills. It is not because they don't have knowledge. But the fact of the matter is, with their knowledge, with their skills and everything, they cannot have a genuine income that can sustain them. Just in 2 weeks ago, more than 480 Senegalese drowned in the Mediterranean Sea on their way to Europe. And what is there for them? They ended up in refugee camps, they end up in detention centers, and yet we cannot have a government that can come out and stand to protect these African youths. So there is a big issue. We can discuss this over on and on and on, but in order for us to move, we have to rely on ourselves. Set a pattern of development that is informed by the African reality, and then we can realize the Agenda 2063 and many other development vision in the near future.
Thanks, Ousman. You have basically given us a great lesson in development economics there that really from where we've gone, where things have gone wrong and where we are today. And Princess Mukelile, I'd love for you as we start to move on into our Q&A here. We have a question in the chat around, the culture of dependency that Africa has been stuck in. It's a cycle that we've been really struggling to break in that regard. But how do we move? We're talking just about this more generally, but how do we actually start to see from where we are today and recognizing these particular challenges that we've all noticed? How do we actually start to, what are the actions that we need to take? What are the first steps that you're taking, and what should we be working towards? Because our vision for tomorrow, we've got a Agenda 2063, we've got a lot of things written on paper, but beyond what we have on paper, what are the actions that the day-to-day African person who, I was talking to someone before and they said, if we were to poll most young Africans or poll Africans across the continent, I would be surprised if we would get a majority or even just a substantial number of people that know and understand that Agenda 2063 exists, know that their governments have set together these elaborate plans of how we move forward, but not the people themselves are not part of moving that forward. So what are some things that you'd be thinking of, and given some of what Ousman has talked about, how should we be thinking of actualizing the reality that we hope to move into?
I think, thank you very much to Tender again for that question. And, my fellow panelists are so knowledgeable. I really am I'm just so excited to be a part of this with you at this time. And I know that we're going to speak after this to be ideas of each other. I know it's going to be very exciting. Just trying to see what we can all contribute to making or paving the way forward for Africa. But, I think it starts with accountability, because I think to all of us, to us as individuals, but also to leaders that are in the various communities that we serve. Because I don't know, I'm a bit disturbed this side. I don't know, someone else is talking. Tatenda?
Our apologies there. We happened to have had another mic. I think Ousman was having a little bit of technical difficulty, so he logged in with another mic there. But we'll get that corrected for you, Princess Mukelile. You can go ahead.
All right, thank you so much. No, I was just saying that, you know, I think what's also important is I think it's accountability. That's also something that we need to look at. And we need to talk about the things that we see that we don't appreciate, that we don't like, that we want to see changed, transformed, and really be put at ease about. Because, you know, the thing is, everything we may talk about things, and, you know, obviously we see that there are possible solutions, and implementation happens to be the issue. And that is where accountability then comes in, because we can all have a master plan. It's all very exciting. But, you know, I believe that for something to come right, or for something to go horribly wrong, it is because of people. And even with the policies that are made, it's the very people that make them that need to ensure that they are followed through. And I think that we're at the point where we need to be done talking, because I think there are many development frameworks out there. I think we need to get to know each other throughout Africa in terms of who actually wants to take Africa forward. I think that's also a good start. And then establish and know what it is that we have. That is a good way to start as well. And then understand each other's strengths, appreciate that as well, talk about it, and then put our fresh young minds together, because the possibilities are there. I think also just track our progress as well, and take baby steps. It doesn't have to it won't happen overnight, but we need to track our progress. I think that's also something else that we need to be conscious of. And I think another thing is, with all that we're talking about, we need to start small with the intention of going big. Because the thing is, we can't keep on complaining. It's like we're done with that. But it's about what can happen for me as an individual, what can happen for the next person. Because if it can work in one household, it can work for a community, and it can ultimately spread like an ecological model, you know. And it needs to be contagious. It needs to spread like wildfire, but in a very positive way, have positive ripple effects throughout Africa in terms of what is it that we can learn from each other? What has worked in your area that we can also probably apply, and talk about that. I think that's also very important, because we don't have all the answers, but because we want to get there and we want to be part of the conversation. I think that's also where inclusivity is very crucial, because I feel like sometimes people are left out, because there's no point in us even having this conversation, because I would love to know where this is all going when we're done, and who cares to listen, and who's going to do something about everything that we're talking about, because we're done. We're like, I'm just about done talking. There's just too many issues, but we iron them out. We need to track that progress. I think that's also very important, and accountability is very crucial. Hold your leaders accountable, no matter, like, depending on whatever space they're in, whether it be traditional, whether it be political. We're all leaders in the various spaces that we're in, and we all have something to contribute. So it's about having conversations, uncomfortable ones sometimes, but it's all about trying to prove that it's possible to form part of a solution. And it must be action-based with deliverables that are trackable. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I've had some experience in monitoring and evaluation, and we've seen now this increase in people recognizing that it goes beyond just putting things on paper. It goes beyond just talking, but how do we actually achieve real impact that affects real lives and uplifts people? And Ms. Princess Mukelile, you said something that I think is really important as we're in this room and talking through this. I'm always thinking of who else isn't in the room. That's a question that we should always ask ourselves when we to the rooms. And I think it's the question that a lot of development experts have had to now start to ask themselves, like, who are we missing in the room as we're coming up with these policies, as we're having these conversations? And I would be remiss to not say, just by virtue of having this conversation, we're missing many Africans who do not have access to internet, many Africans who do not have the privilege that maybe we have to be able to sit here and have a long conversation on Zoom. We're living in a time of COVID where things are really dire and really tough at the moment, where children are out of school and education is not moving, and not everyone. There will be many young Africans that will be left behind during this period. And those are some of the things that we have to sit here and reckon with, and really begin to talk about how do we move forward in those very mundane aspects of our day-to-day life, and make sure that we're bringing everybody to the table when we're putting together our constitution. Does everybody have enough civic education in Africa to be able to hold, if we're upholding democracy, if we're upholding these particular institutions that we inherited of governance? Do people understand how to manage and make those run? So what I'd like to do is move over, and just like, if there are any questions from the audience, I'm happy to have those answered. But we'll be wrapping up in a few minutes here, and I want you, Ousman and Princess Mukelile, to be thinking about, how do we move forward more generally? We've talked a little bit more around education, but if you had the autonomy to chart the 1,000-year vision for Africa, a new African millennium vision, what would that vision look like? What would you want to see for Princess Mukelile, for women? What would the state of women look like? And what are some of the things that you envision? And for Ousman, for the youth, what are some of the things that you would envision, would want to see for a brighter Africa of the future? So we can start by dreaming big, dream well beyond our wildest dreams, but then start to think of, given that wild dream, what would be the first courses of action that you would take tomorrow, and what you and I can do to bring along others to move towards that particular vision that you have. So looking at the questions that we have for the event at the moment, I will look at one question that was asked before was, can we safely say that our education system has failed to integrate our African models at a primary level education? Are there some areas of success? Maybe, I think this might be what this question is asking. Are there some areas of success that we've seen within our African education? What are some things we keep and maintain? And what are some things that have failed and just need to potentially be eradicated? I know neither of you are particularly education experts, but we would love to just sit and think a little bit more about that person's question. If any of you would like to take that, or if you need me to repeat that question.
Okay, I can take it. It's very difficult to say that it's failed. It hasn't failed dismally, but I do think that there are a number of things that can be kept. There are a number of things that need to be prioritized. There are a number of things that I don't think are particularly relevant or contribute in any way to successfully furthering or propelling the African child to the next level of where they should be, whether it be in high school or even higher education learning. So I think because the education system varies from country to country, and yes, there may be a common thread in their various elements, I just think that there needs to be more participation in terms of what is included in it. Those are my sentiments.
Yes,
Go ahead, Ousman.
Yes, thank you so much. I also think like there is one part of the education system which is the most important part, and that is what our education system misses to address. And that is an education system that focuses on the consent and the consciousness of the individual. Today, most of our educated elites today that we look up to and say they are the educated people, they are those individuals that are suffering from this disease, and that is the brain drain. Most of whom don't even believe that there is a progress in this continent. And people are not ready to make a little sacrifice and bring in a change in some of the things that are happening. Because that is what we learn in school. If you go back to look in a book written by Robert Chambers, many development students and experts will know, focusing on the bottom billion, and then, focusing on the rural individuals and etc. You come to realize that in most cases, our education system teaches us to distance ourselves from our own communities. For that, if I have a PhD, I don't want to go back to the village. So it's like my PhD is pushing me away from the problem that I am supposed to be solving. So that is a deficiency in the education system. And if we want to have a future Africa, we need to focus on how do we narrow this particular gap, whereby we don't have to have that distance between the educated elites and that of the general masses. Recently, I started championing the establishment of a think tank in the University of the Gambia, and the purpose of which is to narrow down the gap between public policies and that of the knowledge or the educated individuals. So in most cases, you come to realize that even the policies that we adopt in our own countries are not informed by the realities of the people. That they just go up there, hire an expert, they will come and then just tailor down everything and say, this is the policy. So those are some of the things that we need to look into to make sure that if you are to come up with any project for the village, make sure that it is the village's input that you have in designing that particular policy. And again, our education system needs to focus on preparing the African youths for the future that we want. Our examinations have to be really looked into. This is a continent where if you fail an examination, it's like you've failed your entire life. That a failure in a particular examination will be used by the society to judge your success for the future. If you don't do well in school, you are not important to the society. You are not listened to. Have all the skills. As long as you don't pass examination, they don't care. What kind of education system is that? If education, or if the purpose of education is knowledge and action, then why should individuals be trapped with examinations to the extent that they cannot realize their potential within the continent because they don't pass a particular examination? I've seen individuals who will pass mathematics, but because they don't have a pass in English, they are denied entrance in the university. The individual that is able to pass mathematics, I think he or she is equipped in that area with a language that he or she understands. But because the individual doesn't have good grades in English, you deny them entrance in the university. Some individuals are skillful. They can do a lot of things as engineers with a lot of skills in solving societal problems, but yet because the examination system is something that they cannot cross in theory, then they are denied that practical chance. So there is real problem in our education system. And if we are to move forward, we have to look deeper in the curriculum and design something unique for the future of the African continent.
Certainly, those are poignant points that you have both made, and I think to what you were referring to, Ousman, it's just even within our policy making, even and then I am a student of public policy, and recognizing that within that itself, we don't have enough people who are as much knowledgeable about policy and institutions and how to particularly put those policies together, leading the way, and also incorporating the local voice and incorporating the voice of the different stakeholders that they're serving. So I do love your idea of starting a think tank. We need many, many more think tanks in Africa that can be able to sit down and be the brainchild for the future of the continent, led by African professors, led by African young Africans like yourself, Ousman, led by practitioners and different people who are thinking critically about how we move Africa forward. And so as we start to wrap up, I've the two questions here that are being posed. I'll start with one that just particularly looks at how a lot has been extrapolated from Africa. A lot has been taken away, and still a lot more still gets to be extracted out. As you mentioned, we mentioned earlier before, a majority of the things that we have, we produce most of the food. We produce a lot of materials. We have a lot of things that we have within the continent, but that do get extracted, and we have to eventually import those particular goods to feed ourselves if we need something that's far much more refined. So how do we start to engage as we're thinking about international partners? We can talk about this in a silo of Africa as, oh, here we are, but we are operating within this global landscape where there are other competing ideas and competing countries that we have to reckon with. How does Africa start to begin to make more of its voice on the world stage? How do our leaders, how do us as young Africans, I know Ms. Mukelile, you've found yourselves in the US and different places, engaging with different stakeholders. What are the ways that we can present ourselves in those particular manners? What are the things that we need to be talking about with our other partners around the world in order to ensure that our dignity and our worth and our voice is put front and center and heard for its true reality of what we need to communicate?
Tatenda, thank you very much yet again. I think there's also something that I need to say even just before answering, is that I feel like at times as African children, we have to always prove ourselves before we actually are taken seriously, before getting started with the business of the day. And I just think that alone is a discredit in terms of who we are and what we can do, because I feel like it's not known how powerful Africa is and how educated people in Africa are and how knowledgeable they are, and how passionate they are about Africa as a whole and what Africa has to offer even to the world. I think having the right conversation, I think, would start with breaking down what is the issue, which is, I think we have to have inclusivity. I think also just systems need to be dismantled and put together with African people in mind and prioritizing them, because it's not okay to have people from other countries out of Africa coming into Africa, taking things away from Africa, and then we have to basically buy our own gold, and it probably doesn't look like the gold that we basically gave off, and it probably is discolored, or maybe isn't quite it, or maybe looks somewhat coated. This is just an example, and it's an uncomfortable conversation, because the thing is, there are people that have gotten rich with extracting what Africa has and what should be of Africa for Africa to take Africa forward. And if they will, whoever those people are, I don't know all of them. I think it's about having a conversation and saying, you know what, if you're going to take anything from us, you have to include our people, you have to uplift our communities. Don't strip us of the little that we have, or don't strip us of what we have and think that it is okay. If you're going to engage us, it needs to be complementary. It needs to be participatory. You know, it needs to be with you taking into consideration that this is a business and we all need to benefit. It needs to be a mutually beneficial transaction. That's all that it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think as we wrap up, we've got just a few minutes left here. I will repose my question and also pose the last two questions that we have here. We've got Tembo who's asked what is a vital role of African language versus the educational system. So how do we think about African languages as we move into the future? Particularly, also someone had asked a question around. And this was directed to P.L.O, but I think you'd both be able to answer this question on going back to African identity. Are they values? Are they mindsets? Are they any particular unique attributes of African identity that really identify what it means to be African? So we touched a little bit on this, but as we wrap up, you know, we're talking about African languages, we're talking about some of these uniqueness and cultures. What are some of those core tenets that you would think if you were to define those particular values and mindsets? What are those values and mindsets that we should be keeping in mind?
Is that to me or to my brother?
I think let's start with Ousman and then we'll drop it back to you, Princess MK.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yes, I think it is the Amir of Borno State of Nigeria who once said, Africa is the only country where we cannot have our own doctors who graduate with learning from our own language. In a sense that you can have a Chinese that can become a doctor without being able to speak English or French. You can have an Arab that becomes a doctor without being able to speak English or French. In Africa, you cannot become a doctor without being able to speak two of these languages. And that is the problem. Our languages are not integrated in our education system. And now it's like a belief that it is not even possible, forgetting that English today is not a traditional language in Africa. French is not a traditional language in Africa. It was just introduced over 400 years ago, programmed, strategized, put in schools, and it becomes where it is today. We can equally do the same. I have seen in East Africa where Swahili has been adopted as official language in Tanzania, in Rwanda, in so many other countries there, in Kenya, people speak Swahili, and you can learn it in school. So that is the beginning of it. We have to look into at the regional blocks. How do we make sure that there is a language in East Africa that almost everyone speaks? How do we make sure that there is a language in West Africa that almost everyone speaks? And then they are being taught in schools, like we have them in the Maghreb, in southern part of Africa, and etc. If we can have language like this in place, for that we only need a 5 language that almost every individual speaks in the continental level. Then therefore we'll be able to promote 1 or 2 at the European Union. So to make, at the African Union, to make sure that they use this particular language to address some fundamental issues. Some of the problems that we have in our development is communication. No matter how beautiful a policy is, if you take that to my grandmother in the village, and you want to explain a whole book of a policy in English, she has nothing to say. She has no understanding over it. And they are the ones that you are targeting for a particular policy. You take it to people who don't even understand the language. How do you persuade them to take responsibilities? How do you persuade them to take actions? That becomes a big challenge for the continent. And lastly, with the issue of character and etc. In Africa, my culture teaches me to be righteous. My culture teaches me to be kind. My culture teaches me to be generous. My culture teaches me to be hardworking and dedicated. My culture teaches me to love for an individual, to tolerate, and etc. These are things that I don't have to go to school to learn. My culture teaches me this. My family teaches me this. If I walk down the streets here in the Gambia and did something wrong, someone will come and tell me and address me in a very African way. Ousman, this you're doing is wrong, do it this way. If my child is doing something wrong in the streets, someone that don't even have anything to do with me, they will go get the child and bring the child to my house and said, this is what we found your child doing. That is the Africanness that we have. Those are the values, those are the dignity, those are the respect that we need to promote as a people, because that is our priority and those are our prides and we are proud of it. And how do we make sure that these particular values are linked to the education that we receive? No matter how skillful you are, if you are not generous, if you are not kind, if you are not righteous, you end up using your knowledge in a wrong way. So these are some of the values that we need it to accompany every individual African, wherever they go, to make sure that they can march and they can walk in line with the African interest and African development forward.
It's a beautiful place that you've left us there, Ousman. And Princess Mukelile, I'll give you the last minute that we have to share as well within that vein, that beauty of who it is and the beauty of who we are as Africans, and any other insights you'd love to share with our audience as we wrap up.
Thank you very much, Tatinda, for that opportunity. I know that we're coming to a wrap. I think we need to speak our languages. Because the very fact that English happens to be a medium of instruction in many platforms can also be the very thing that dissects us. And I think that sometimes we forget. Other people think that through being highly educated, they end up discrediting the superiority of their home languages or mother tongues. And I think that we need to really take pride in that and know that we are the people that are the retainers of who we are through language, and really knowing who we are and celebrating that, and through speaking the language, African languages, and also having an openness to being taught or learning different African languages. I mean, I'd love to learn how to speak Swahili, if anyone is willing to teach me. I'd also love to teach someone Zulu, but that's also about understanding that there are things about us that are very unique. We don't know it all, but the reality is interwoven into our African DNA is that there is Ubuntu that speaks to being humble, that speaks to be loving, that speaks to being caring, that speaks to being concerned about each other and wanting each other's lives to be better and improved, and being concerned, and also knowing that you can't just pretend that you're living on an island when you've got neighbors, which is what African people are taught, that care about, has your neighbor eaten? Is their child going to school? And when something is not right or something is off, talk about it, state it. You know, obviously we don't promote corporal punishment, but you know, Africans have a way of setting the way straight. It may be spoken about, it may be behind closed doors, but you know, the thing is, there are things that our forefathers, our grandmothers, our mothers, fathers, key role players in our lives have said and taught us and contributed into our lives to make us better people, in terms of ensuring that we're great people. We also become the role models that we observed and saw prior to other experiences. So, you know, I think together as Africans, we need to ululate the beautiful things of Africa. And I think that we need to bow our heads in shame and be concerned about anything that does not promote Africa, that discredits us as African children, and know that we need to support each other a whole lot more. We need to give more guidance. We need to open ourselves to mentorship and coaching in whatever space we're in, and know that Africa is special. Africa is incredibly beautiful. Africa has so much to offer, and there's so much that we can contribute even as individuals in order to make sure that Africa truly is the continent that it should be, and that it gets the respect that it deserves.
Well, thank you so much. I know we could talk for much longer. We could talk about the vision for the future. We could talk about how we move to action. But the things that you've both brought together that you've ended this panel on is some of those particular essential things about being African, which is Ubuntu. Like, we are just the beauty of some of the things that are being lost through individualism or anything else. Our communal culture is a strength and not a weakness. It is a part of who we are, and it is a part of things that we can uphold and begin to uphold each other and move in unity to be able to move towards the solutions that we need, and recognizing our culture and the inherent identity that we've had from a long time, that our parents have passed on and our grandparents have passed on to us, that we can pass on to the next generation and commit to utilizing that to making Africa better in the future. So as we wrap up, thank you so much to Princess Mukelile. Thank you so much to Ousman Touray, and thank you to P.L.O Lumumba for the time that he was able to give us during this day. And we're really excited to continue these conversations. I am going to pass it back on to Amy Ramirez, who will kind of kick us off and just basically to end us off with information about what else Realize Africa has going on in the future, and what is our hope in order to not only go between talking, but also moving towards action and moving Africa forward. Thank you so much to our panelists.
Thank you, Tatenda. Thank you very much.
Right, to everyone that's been attending, we just want to thank you so much for your time. To our panelists, our speakers, I have been awakened, and you truly embody the spirit of Africa, and we're so grateful that you've been with us. To a special thank you to the SRC agency for helping us with the event management and the technical parts in the background. So just want to give a big thank you. Another thank you to our digital fellows, and part of what are we doing to make Africa better. And I love that, Princess Mukelile, where you said, what is the action? Well, we're so honored to have two digital fellows, Taha Hasham from Egypt, who designed our logo. And then we've also got Tanya from Zimbabwe, and they've been working on our digital marketing. So it's been absolutely incredible. And then we also just want you to visit our website at www.realize.africa. So we have our mentorship sessions rolling out soon. So just make sure that you're following us on all our social medias. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. And we will be uploading this Zoom session on YouTube, so you can catch up and you can refer your friends. And then in 2021, we're very excited. We'll be having our first Women's Conference. And so we're very excited about that. But the closing message here is, together we can make Africa better. Thank you all for joining. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.